Well, let me also just welcome you this morning. My name is Andy Morgan, one of the pastors here, and it is good to be able to gather together. It's kind of nice to have, we don't often have this week after Thanksgiving that's not the first Sunday of Advent. That will be next Sunday, but it's just an opportunity to once again just gather to give thanks for what God has given us and what God has done for us. I hope this month you have been taking the opportunity to give thanks as we think about the power of generosity, God's generosity to us, the grace that God has poured into us, the many gifts that God has given us. I hope that you've taken time to not only be grateful, but to reflect on the power in our lives and in the lives of others when we are generous. When we are generous, there is an overflow of joy. We often think of maybe the joy of someone else, that they receive our generosity, but no, there is joy that overflows in our lives when we are generous. And generosity brings a deep sense of peace to our lives. There's a sense of greater purpose that we have when we are giving and giving generously. We are also drawn closer to God. We as children were created to be generous, and as children of God, because God is generous. And so as we are generous, we are drawn closer to our Heavenly Father. And generosity also opens the door for God's grace to be experienced, God's grace to be experienced in other people and in the lives of those around us. Generosity is this powerful force in our world. But a lot of times we don't think we can be generous because we think that generosity is only seen or experienced or given in big ways. And as long as generosity is only seen in big gifts of time, energy, resources, money, we're never going to maybe step out to be generous. We're never going to think we have that much to give. If generosity of time means giving all of our extra time to something, then we may never step out to try to give in that way. As long as we think that generosity only takes place in big ways, we may never step out in little ways to seek to be generous. But generosity does not have to come in big gifts of money or time or energy or resources. Sometimes generosity is seen in very simple and small ways. Life-changing generosity can be experienced in the very simple things we may do for someone else. In Matthew chapter 25, Jesus tells this story. He's talking to the righteous, the faithful people, those that have been faithful in serving him. Jesus says, "Come, you who are blessed by my Father, and take your inheritance in the kingdom prepared for you since before the creation of the world. For I was hungry, and you gave me something to eat. I was thirsty, and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger, and you invited me in. I needed clothes, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you looked after me. I was in prison, and you came to visit me." Now, the people that Jesus is talking to are confused, because they never saw Jesus hungry or thirsty. They never did any of these things for Jesus. They say, then the righteous will answer him, "Lord, when did we see you hungry and feed you, or thirsty and give you something to drink? When did we see you a stranger and invite you in, or needing clothes and clothe you? When did we see you sick or in prison and go to visit you?" They're confused. They're like, "Jesus, we would have done it gladly for you, but we never saw you in any of those conditions." And this is how Jesus replies, "Truly I tell you, whatever you did for one of the least of these, my brothers and sisters of mine, you did for me." We're serving Jesus when we give a cup of water to someone who's thirsty, or food to someone who's hungry. We are caring for Jesus when we are caring for someone in need around us. And did you notice the ways of caring were simple? They didn't cost a lot. A cup of water, a morsel of food, a simple invitation, spending time with someone who's sick, going out of our way to visit someone in prison. They are simple ways of expressing generosity that changed people's lives. Jesus highlights simple acts of generosity. So we need to start thinking life-changing generosity can be expressed in very small and simple ways. People's lives can be forever changed by a simple, generous act. Peter, one of the main disciples of Jesus, the one who Jesus said, I'm going to build the church on you. You are going to be the foundation of my movement. Peter had his life changed by one simple and yet generous act. The story is found in the beginning of John's gospel, and at this point in John chapter 1, people are just beginning to hear about Jesus. He's just kind of publicly appeared on the scene, and people are hearing about his teaching, and they're coming to meet him. One of the first people to meet Jesus that we hear about in John's gospel is Andrew. And Andrew brings his brother Simon to meet Jesus. It's in John chapter 1, beginning at verse 40. Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, was one of the two who heard what John had said and who had followed Jesus. The first thing Andrew did was to find his brother Simon and tell him, we have found the Messiah, that is the Christ. And he brought him to Jesus. Jesus looked at him, this is Simon, Jesus looked at him and said, you are Simon, son of John. You will be called Cephas, which when translated is Peter. The generous act of Andrew was to simply invite his brother to meet Jesus. Hey, Simon, I've met this guy. I think he's something unique. His teaching is like no other. Could he be the Messiah? Is this the one? He invites Peter, Simon, to meet Jesus. And it's in that very first meeting that Jesus looks at Simon and somehow knows you're the one that will continue my movement into the future. On you, I will build my kingdom. And so I'm going to change your name from Simon to Cephas. Cephas, which translated means Peter. And that word, both Cephas and Peter, means rock, foundation. Andrew's simple act of inviting his brother, hey, why don't you come with me to meet Jesus, changed the trajectory of Simon's life. He was a fisherman fishing for fish. He now becomes a fisher of men and women for God. He's now going to feed people spiritually, sustain them forever. He became the leader of the Jesus movement. After Jesus ascended into heaven, Peter is the face, he is the voice of Jesus in the world. It is Peter's sermon that transforms the lives of 3,000 people. Think of it. I don't think Jesus preached a sermon that transformed the lives of 3,000 people. But Peter did. The generosity of Andrew simply inviting his brother to come and meet Jesus changed Simon's life. It changed our lives because Peter, the foundation of the church, changed the world. Sometimes the most life-changing acts of generosity are found in simple acts of love and service. Sometimes the most generous thing that we can do is simply invite someone to meet Jesus. Invite someone to worship with us. Welcome someone that we see in worship. My life forever changed because of a simple invitation. I was a freshman at Michigan State University. I was not doing well. I was not happy. I wanted to return home when a friend sent me a letter. Hey, Andy, you should check out InterVarsity Christian Fellowship. It's like a big youth group. She and I were part of the same church youth group. I had just seen a sign for InterVarsity and a table with information, and so I went back there and I met Gary and Ruth Abbott. What I remember of Gary and Ruth is that they were really funny, because when I went up and said, hey, are you with this? Gary said, no, we have no idea what this is all about. Ruth hit him and said, don't listen to him. Yes, we're part of this. And that kind of just pulled me in, because I was like, yeah, it's something like what I would say. But they were genuine and they cared, and they said, we want to invite you to our first meeting. It's that night. So I went that night, and Gary and Ruth saw me walk in, and they began to introduce me to other students who lived in my dorm complex. So I suddenly had now connections, a growing sense of community. I quickly got involved in InterVarsity. My faith grew in ways that I could never have imagined. I accepted Jesus. I decided I didn't want to just make a lot of money in my life, which is why I went to Michigan State. I wanted to now honor God with my life, and it took me a while to figure out how I was going to do that, but my life forever changed because of a simple invitation. A friend saying you should check out InterVarsity. Gary and Ruth saying, you should come to the meeting tonight. Them seeing me walk in the door and introduce me to others. My life changed because of a simple welcome. Sometimes the most generous things we can do, the most life-changing things we can do, is invite people to meet Jesus, to welcome people when they come and are part of the church. I just want to share with you some stories, some life-changing stories about the power of generosity expressed in very simple ways. When I was a pastor in Altoona, we had a group of kids hanging out on our front step. They were causing a lot of trouble, and so our neighbors called us and said, can you please do something about the kids who are hanging out on your steps? And so I called the police to see what they had to say, and they said, oh yeah, that's the Second and Second gang. Our church was located on 2nd Avenue and 2nd Street. And I thought to myself, these elementary school kids are already known as a gang. And so we talked about, what do we do? And so some of us in the church decided, well, let's just go out and meet them. And so we got a cooler of soda, and I'm going to date myself, when we got a boom box, the kind with a cassette player still in it. And we went outside and we played some Christian music, and we sat there, and the older kids in the gang moved down to 2nd Street and 3rd Avenue, but the younger kids, they came up and they started talking to us, and we invited them into the church. We showed that they had never been in a church in their life. We showed them the pews. This was an old church, the stained glass windows, and we had those great big chairs that sat up front, and the kids came and they sat in the chairs, and they just were having the best time, and they kept coming back, and that began an after-school program called The Rock. A few years later, there was a young girl who was coming to The Rock. Her family situation wasn't the best, but she came to The Rock, and we got to know her, and one Sunday morning, she decided to come to church. So she shows up in pajama pants, a sweatshirt, and big pink fuzzy slippers, and she walks in the back door all by herself. And I'm sitting there thinking, okay, what's going to happen? And the people who knew her from our after-school program went up and they loved on her and they welcomed her and they invited her to sit with them, and they just reached out to her and they welcomed her and they loved her. And she came back. And she joined the church youth group and she accepted Jesus, and she finished high school, which was maybe not what the trajectory of her life was when looking at her family. And she went on to college and she got married. And a few years ago, I ran into Trisha at a wedding, and she's doing incredibly well, very active in her church. And we talked about her walking in with big pink slippers, and we were laughing about it, but a simple invitation to have this young girl who did not fit the culture of the church in that moment, a simple invitation, hey, why don't you come and sit with us, changed everything. Here at Faith Church, there was a young man who was invited by his aunt and uncle to come to worship, and finally one Sunday he did. You need to know the young man had gotten into some legal trouble which was not yet finalized, and so there was a lot of uncertainty in his future. But he came, and he came back again and again. And then he was invited to join a Sunday school class. And I was a little anxious about this because the class that invited him was significantly older than he was. There was, I'm not kidding, a 40 to 50 year age gap between him and his class. And I was a little worried about how that was going to go. I shouldn't have worried, because that class just loved him and loved on him and welcomed him and accepted him. And he accepted Jesus, and he said, Andy, I want to be baptized. And I was like, and join the church. And I said, that's great. He goes, yeah, but I want to be immersed. I want to do this like outside, like they did with Jesus. And I'm like, okay, you find the location and I'll do it. And it was one of the older men in the class who said, why don't you do it on my property? He had a creek running through there. And so we gathered at that creek. His entire Sunday school class gathered with him, and he was baptized. A simple welcome, again and again and again, changed this young man's life. Linda Hoffman shared a story with me that 46 years ago, she showed up here at Faith Church for the first time with a baby in one arm and a toddler by the hand. And she was walking in. She had been encouraged to try the church. She had been kind of invited by someone, or encouraged to attend by someone who worked with her mom. Said, hey, you should visit the church. And so Linda was walking in with a baby in one arm and a child in the other when a woman was walking out and saw Linda. That woman stopped, introduced herself, turned around and walked back in with Linda, showed her the nursery, showed her where the children's ministry takes place, made her feel welcome. Linda was so touched by the generosity of this simple gesture. Noticing someone, introducing yourself, seeing a need, and just the simple gesture was walking back into the church, taking that extra few minutes to make sure you know where you're going and feel welcomed. That was 46 years ago, and as you know, Linda's still here. She's been on staff for most of that time, and she's helped share the gospel of Jesus through mission and ministry and music and service and mission projects. I can't even begin to think of how many lives have been transformed through Linda. And it all started because there was a woman who was willing to introduce herself and turn around and walk back into the building. A simple invitation changed everything. Sally McCartney, if you know her, Sally McCartney tells a similar story. She was in worship when her children were young, and she was here, and she was getting involved in things. And a woman came to her one day and said, you've got, all these children, your life is busy. I'm sure you don't have any time to cook or to bake. I would like to bake you a cake. I'll bring it on Sunday so that you can enjoy your family can enjoy a cake because I'm sure you don't have time to do it. That so touched Sally. It changed her. I was talking to Sally this past week. She said, I'm trying to do the same thing for other people now, Andy. I'm trying to, in simple ways, encourage those who need encouragement. What you may not know is Sally and her family provide all of the pumpkin pies for our Christmas dinner. She is still paying forward the gift of a dessert. Someone simply saw, oh, wow, you have a lot of kids. You must not have time to bake. Can I bake you a cake this week? And speaking about the Christmas dinner, several years ago, a man who had not been to church in a long time, was really skeptical about the church, was invited to come and serve at the Christmas dinner. So he showed up on Christmas Day, and he was overwhelmed by the number of people from the church who were giving up just a small amount of time, but on Christmas Day, to come and put meals together for someone that they don't even know. He was so touched by those simple acts of service. If you've not been here for the Christmas dinner, sometimes you just walk through a line holding a box, and people put the food in it, and then you close it up and you give it to someone else, and then you go back to the front of the line and you walk through the line, and that's what you do for, I don't know, a half hour? A man watching people simply walk through a line to serve other people so changed him that he started to worship here. And he said, well, I had to come because what kind of people do this? And he got to know some of the people who do this. And he joined the church, became active in a small group. The simple act of feeding people on Christmas Day changed a person's life. One more story. Another staff person here at Faith Church told me about he had a friend who was going through a difficult time, a messy divorce and custody situation. He wanted to help his friend, and so he had been encouraged to invite the friend to come to church. And he's like, I don't think he's going to come. But he just felt compelled to invite his friend to come to church. And so he did. And lo and behold, his friend came to church. And he brought his son. And they kept coming back. And that young man, a single dad, going through a difficult time, showed up in a Bible study. And he said, I've never been in a Bible study, but I need to understand the Bible because I want to be able to read it and teach my son about it. And so he's been involved in a Bible study. And then in a few weeks, he's going to lead that Bible study. And the only reason he's going to lead it is because the leader of the Bible study invited people to take a week and lead. A simple invitation from a friend who said, my life has been encouraged by the church. I want to offer that to someone else. A simple invitation changed this single dad's life. And I have to tell you, his story, that single dad's story, is not unique. There are other single dads and single moms whose lives are being changed because people here have welcomed them and encouraged them. Sometimes the most generous thing we can do is invite someone to meet Jesus. I go to worship and it makes a difference to me. I find hope. I find encouragement. I've found love, acceptance, community. I go every week just to kind of get filled up again. I don't know if you need that in your life, but if you do, I'd love to invite you to come and worship with me. I hope that as you've heard some of these stories, that there has been someone in your life, some situation, maybe that you've seen here at the church, that God is just laying on your heart. And you're thinking, you know what? I really need to invite my coworker, my neighbor, my family member. I really need to get involved and reach out to the people that I see around me every single Sunday. I want to serve in a simple way that maybe someone would have their life changed by that. I pray that God has just been laying a situation or a person on your heart. Is there someone who needs to meet Jesus? I invite you to be praying about that situation and praying for that person and praying for the opportunity to be generous. This is the best time of year to invite people to come to worship. Church will be decorated next week. It'll look beautiful. We'll start singing Christmas carols, so hopefully maybe they recognize the music. But more than that, this time of year, there's something in all of us that longs for family, that longs for community, that longs for connection, that longs for God. Now's the best time to invite people to worship. Whether that's a Sunday morning or whether that's Christmas Eve, people are looking to get connected. Who can you invite? Maybe the invitation is to invite someone to come and serve with you at the Christmas dinner. We have opportunities before Christmas Day. If you're just not in town on Christmas Day and you can't do that, there are opportunities before that. But maybe there's someone who could say, hey, you know what? Our church does a dinner and we could use some help. Would you like to come with me? I'll be honest. Sometimes we have a lot of people signed up. We can always take one more. And if you invite someone and it's really busy, let the other person serve. You can step back. Because them giving food to someone who's hungry means they're giving food to Jesus, which is changing their life. Maybe there's someone that you've been thinking, you know, I really love to invite them to join us on Christmas Day in serving. More than one person's life has been changed because of serving at the Christmas dinner. So I want to invite you during these next 4 weeks to be generous in the little ways. Bake cookies and take them to a neighbor. Invite a friend to join you in worship. Invite a friend to join you on Christmas Eve. After worship today, we have these Christmas Eve invite postcards. These aren't the ones for you to take home and put on your refrigerator because the back side says, come share the experience. It's an invitation to give to someone else. We just want to give a tool, a resource. So that person you're thinking of, you can maybe, you know what, even if you're not that brave, maybe you just put it on their desk at work, stick it on their door. Don't get too annoying and put it under everyone's windshield wipers at the Wise store. Be more intentional in that. Pray about who God is leading you to invite and then invite them. Be generous in the little things and let God use you to transform someone's life. Maybe the person that you are thinking about right now, who God's saying they need an invitation to come and experience me, maybe that person will become the next Peter, the next rock that God is going to keep building his kingdom on. That's the power of generosity through a simple invitation.